When we get into the courting and the umbrella chapter, the roles are reversed between Jo and Fredrik, and it is now Fredrik who openly admires Jo. Fredrik's model of masculinity is different. He respects her boundaries and does not overstep them, and only makes his moves on Jo when he has Jo's full consent. When Fredrik proposes to Jo, he gives her a German title, Professorin, which does not mean professor's little wife like it was translated into my older Finnish translation of Little Woman. It is German and means female professor, and by doing that, Fredrik acknowledges Jo's thirst for knowledge and considers her as his intellectual equal. In both 1994 film and 2019 film, Jo and Fredrik part in bad terms, but in the book they part as friends, both wondering if it could lead into something more in the future. Early as it was, he was at the station next morning to see Jo off, and thanks to him, she began her solitary journey with the pleasant memory of a familiar face smiling its farewell, a bunch of violets to keep her company, and best of all, the happy thought, well, the winter's gone, and I've written no books, earned no fortune, but I've made a friend worth having, and I try to keep him all my life. Jo and Fritz spent the next 2 years writing letters to each other. Taking care of Beth forces Jo to re-evaluate her life. After Beth's passing, she goes through a period of depression, grief and loneliness. In the book right after Beth's death, Laurie sends Jo a letter from Europe and proposes her again. This happens the moment Laurie has realized he has feelings for Amy. Jo sends him a polite answer and refuses again. Laurie's second proposal has never been adapted. In the book, shared looks continue when Fredrik comes courting. Though a very social man, I think Mr. Bear would have gone decorously away and come again another day. But how could he, when Jo shut the door behind him and bereft him of his hat? Perhaps her face had something to do with it, or she forgot to hide her joy at seeing him, and showed it with a frankness that proved irresistible to the solitary man, whose welcome far exceeded his boldest hopes. A stealthy glance now and then refreshed her like sips of fresh water after a dusty walk, for the sidelong peep showed her propitious omens. Mr. Bear's face had lost the absent-minded expression and looked all alive with interest in the present moment. Actually young and handsome, she thought. Shared looks were a big part of courting, and Jo comes to the realization that Fritz has truly come to court her. Jo flushes. She becomes fully self-aware, and she is quite pleased and thrilled by the idea. Then we get the third and the most important part of the 19th century courtship: identification of selves, mutual recognition of one another, which in Little Woman is the umbrella. Courting is usually rushed in the films. Fredrik, in fact, visits the Marches for 2 weeks, and during all this time he is hoping to see signs of love from Jo. For a fortnight the professor came and went with lover-like regularity, then he stayed away for 3 whole days and made no sign, a proceeding which caused everybody to look sober, and Jo to become pensive at first, and then, alas for romance, very cross. The idea of possibly losing Fredrik has become petrifying. She goes to the German quarter to look for him, but he is nowhere to be found. It starts to rain and Jo is ready to burst into tears, and then he is there. I feel to know the strong-minded lady who goes so bravely under many horse noses, and so fast through much muss. Do you do down here, my friend? I'm shopping. Mr. Bear smiled as he glanced from the pickle factory on one side to the wholesale hide and leather concern on the other, but to her he only said politely, "You have no umbrella. May I go also and take for you the bundles?" "Yes, thank you." Jo's cheeks were as red as a rib, and she wondered what he thought of her. But she didn't care, for in a minute she found herself walking away arm in arm with her professor, feeling as if the sun had suddenly burst out with uncommon brilliancy, that the world was all right again, and that one truly happy woman was passed through the wet that day. Jo doesn't have lots of experiences with men, so it makes sense that she is quite clumsy and awkward around him. In an earlier version of the script of Greta Gerwig's film, Jo actually pulled down a chair when Fritz came to visit, and he fixed it in a very calm manner. At least they included the part of Jo setting herself on fire, and the viewer finds out that Fredrik is just as clumsy. "We thought you had gone," said Jo hastily, for she knew he was looking at her. Her bonnet wasn't big enough to hide her face, and she feared he might think the joy of it betrayed unmaidenly. Once again Jo flushes, and she is very aware of his presence. The sharing of the interior lives happens while trying to interpret the other person's tone and voice and gestures. And Friedrich tells her about the new job and that he can now provide a better home for his nephews. Jo is encouraged by the prospects. Indeed you should. How splendid it will be to have you doing what you like and be able to see you often. And the boys, cried Jo, clinging to the lads as an excuse for the satisfaction she could not help betraying. But we shall not meet often, I fear. This place is at the west, so far away, and Jo left her skirts to their fate, as if it did not matter now what became of her clothes or herself. Mr. Bear could read several languages, but he had not learned how to read woman yet. He flattered himself that he knew Jo pretty well, and was therefore much amazed by the contradictions of voice, face, and manner which she showed him in a rapid succession that day, for she was in half a dozen different moods in the course of half an hour. When she met him she looked surprised, though it was impossible to help suspecting that she had come for that express purpose. When he offered her his arm, she took it with a look that filled him with delight. But when he asked if she missed him, she gave such a chilly, formal reply that despair fell upon him.
Thank you so much for sharing my love for Little Woman. All the transcriptions of the Little Woman podcast are now available as paperbacks, ebooks, and as audiobooks on Amazon, Kindle, Nook, and bookstores. You can find all the links from the description. And now, back to the show.
On learning his good fortune, she almost clapped her hands. Was the joy all for the boys? Then on hearing his destination, she said, so far away, in a tone of despair that lifted him onto a pinnacle of hope, but the next minute she tumbled him down again by observing like one entirely absorbed in the matter. Narrator points out the difficulties of the mute courting, the narration of love, how to verbalize it through non-verbal clues. When they go shopping, Jo is very clumsy, and Fredrik starts to see how Jo indeed goes by contradictions. In the store she hides her fright face to a shawl. Does this suit you, Mr. Bear? She asked, turning her back to him and feeling deeply grateful for the chance of hiding her face. I actually always thought that this scene was very intimate. It gives me some serious 1995 Sense and Sensibility vibes. The next moment she rummages the counters like a confirmed bargain hunter. Jo's pattern is to hide vulnerabilities into action, but Jo has gotten into a point where she is ready to let down all her walls. For now the sun seemed to have gone in as suddenly as it came out, and the world grew muddy and miserable again, and for the first time she discovered that her feet were cold, her head ached, and that her heart was fuller of pain than the latter. Mr. Bear was going away. He only cared for her as a friend. It was all a mistake, and the sooner it was over the better. With this idea in her head, she hailed an approaching omnibus with such a hasty gesture that the daisies flew out of the pot and were badly damaged. This is where we get into the culmination, the mutual recognition of one another. I beg your pardon, I didn't see the name distinctly. Never mind, I can walk. I'm used to the plodding in the mud, returned Jo, winking hard, because she would have died rather than openly wipe her eyes. Mr. Bear saw the drops on her cheeks, so she turned her head away. The sight seemed to touch him very much, for suddenly stooping down he asked in a tone that meant a great deal, "Heart's dearest, why do you cry? Liking someone is scary. These two have liked each other quite a long time now. When you first time bring somebody into your life, it is scary because you have to admit to yourself that you are fully open. Taking the step forward, tell you love them is like standing on the edge of a cliff. Jo and Friedrich are both standing on the cliff, and when Jo opens up, Friedrich tells her that he has already fallen hard. Now, if Jo had not been new to this sort of thing, she would have said she wasn't crying, had a chord in her head, told any other feminine fib proper to the occasion. Instead of which, that undignified creature answered with an irresistible sob, "Because you are going away." "Oh my God, that is so good," cried Mr. Bear, managing to clap his hands in spite of the umbrella and the bundles. "Jo, I have nothing but much love to give you. I came to see if you could care for it, and I waited to be sure that I was something more than a friend. Am I? Can you make a little place in your heart for old Fritz?" he added, all in one breath. "Oh yes," said Jo, and he was quite satisfied, for she folded both hands over his and looked up at him with an expression that plainly showed how happy she would be to walk through life beside him, even though she had no better shelter than the old umbrella, if he carried it. Friedrich wants to go on to his knees, but they are on the middle of the street covered in mud, which makes it difficult, so they express their love by looking at each other's, and they no longer care about the surroundings. Jo calls Friedrich by his first name for the first time, which delights him. He says that his sister was the last person calling him Friedrich, Poor man, that was 5 years ago. Fritz also calls Jo as Jo and not as Miss March anymore. Conversation is now open and tender. Louisa's love for Germany continues when Friedrich asks Jo to use the word "du" instead of English "you." For those of you who don't speak German, there is Sie, which is how you address another person formally. Then there is "du," which is informal, and in the 19th century context, much more intimate. In Old English, "tu" was the more intimate form of "you." Friedrich shows Jo the poem that brought him to her. The poem is called In the Garret, and Jo wrote it after Beth's death, while feeling very lonely. In most adaptations, Friedrich has come bringing Jo her new book. The poem shows that Friedrich has taken the time to follow Jo's career. When Jo asks what kept him away for so long, we find out that he has been looking for a job so that he could provide a home for Jo. This highlights Friedrich's self-reliancy, which is a value that Jo appreciates. Chapter ends into the very famous "Not empty now" line. "I am glad you are poor. I could not bear a rich husband," said Jo decidedly, adding in a softer tone, "Don't fear poverty. I've known it long enough to lose my dread and be happy working for those I love. And don't call yourself old. 40 is the prime of life. I couldn't help loving you if you were 70. Professor found that so touching that he would have been glad of his handkerchief. As he couldn't, Jo wiped his eyes for him and said, laughing, as she took away a bundle or two, "I may be strong-minded, but no one can say I am out of my sphere now and bearing burdens. I'm to carry my share, Friedrich, and help to earn the home. Make up your mind to that, or I'll never go," she added resolutely as he tried to reclaim his load. "Ah, to give me such hope and courage, and I have nothing to give back but a full heart and these empty hands," cried the professor, quite overcome. Jo never would learn to be proper, for when he said that, as they stood upon the steps, she just put both hands into his, whispering tenderly, "Not empty now," and stooping down, kissed her Friedrich under the umbrella. Here's another quote from Christine Doyle. "While Meg and John are the down-to-earth couple, Amy and Laurie are the romantics, the artists. Jo and Friedrich combine the two. One of Friedrich's most compelling qualities is that he combines domestic and romantic heroism. Most 19th century courtship restrained from crossing the line until marriage, but that did not necessarily mean that all relationships lacked passion. Listro mentions that middle to upper middle class couples often did not undertake physical consummation until marriage. However, during unchaperoned courtship they would. Primary sources tend to suggest that during the 19th century, sex became linked to the sentiment of love, especially for women. While women were supposed to be pure by nature, Listro asserts that Victorians joined the sexual and spiritual and the moral in the concept of true love. Here's a quote from Little Woman fan Kimberly East. "In The Professor, Jo found a candidate for a kind of marriage she had not considered possible, a union between two people where freedom and partnership intertwined. In such a relationship, she didn't have to sacrifice anything. As a matter of fact, she was able to realize a dream that she otherwise may not have been able to achieve, and in later books, she finds success as an authoress as well as providing a home for boys. Her liberation is complete, and no sacrifice has been required of her."